Right, so the last speaker for tonight is Madelaine Dickie. He has worked as a rollerblading and a skateboarding instructor, a radio producer, and a disability support officer. And most recently, he's managed the media and communications for an Aboriginal organization in the Kimberley, I think it's VA, so from Australia. Work means travel, travel means serving. So Madelaine scored empty point breaks in Mozambique, got crook with malaria in Indonesia, and crashed a rental car racing to the surf in Spain, and has been bewitched by a welwitschia in Namibia. In 2011, Madelaine received a Prime Minister's Australia Asia Endeavour Award to move to West Java, Indonesia, and complete her first novel, Tropo. In 2014, Tropo won the City of Fremantle TAG Hungerford Award. So please help me to welcome Madelaine.
When I was 18, I nearly drowned surfing racetracks at Uluwatu. There were 8 guys in the lineup, 6 of them in helmets, all of them in booties. I paddled out in a bikini and socks. On my third wave, I slipped and got dragged back first over the reef. As Frank Stanford wrote, blood came out like hot soda. When I was 21, an old Aussie bloke told me a story. He told me 30 years ago, when he was in a lonely seaside lodgement in Lombok, he awoke to feel someone strangling him. He couldn't breathe. He opened his eyes. There was no one there. When I was 25 and living in Jawa Barat, I often visited a particularly remote reef. During the day, I surfed. At night, I slept at the edge of the jungle on my board bag under a mozzie net. One day, I saw a boat wrecked out on the reef. I learned it had been carrying a load of Afghan asylum seekers bound for Australia. Danger, politics, magic, surf, these are the things that have drawn me to Indonesia again and again. For me, writing is using imagination to shape memory into art, and so some of these stories in various forms have made their way into my debut novel, Tropo. Tropo is about an Aussie expat called Shane. Shane's a bogan, he's vulgar, he's unsophisticated, he's uncouth. He owns a surf resort in South Sumatra, and there are all sorts of rumours flying around about him. They say he cut the electricity so the mosque couldn't broadcast the morning prayer. They say he cut the fingers off a beautiful whore from Bandar Lampung. The story's told from the perspective of Penny, a young Aussie chick who's a surfer, a drifter, and she's got a job managing Shane's surf resort. What follows is a tale about the collision between 2 very different cultures, the Australian surf culture and the culture in a part of Indonesia where people are devout Muslims. I'd like to read a section from my book now. It's a rendition of one of those mythic nights of storytelling that happen every now and then in Indonesia, when cautionary tales are passed on that teach bule to be more careful, more sensitive, more culturally aware. I heard a savage story about a Dukan when I was a teenager. Dad had offered our house in Kuta to some family friends, and we relocated to Balangan, a white sand, blue water cove. The road down to Balangan was still unmarked, a hazardous slide of loose gravel and slyly squealing pigs. We slept on the balcony of a guest house under mozzie nets, and at night, Dad got on the piss and I let a Russian butterfly kiss my thighs in swap for sips of buttery arak until I got caught. Dad was disgusted, not because I was necking a bloke 10 years my senior, but because I was with a Russian. No Russians, no Brazilians, he told me. What about Japs? Yeah, Japs are all right. Dad's measure of a man's worth was how courteous he was in the surf and how well he surfed. In his experience, Russians or Brazos didn't make the grade. Dad kept me closer after that. No sneaking to the other guest houses to watch the backpackers practice fire poi. The night I heard the Dukan story, I was wrecked sideways in a hammock. The surf had been solid, and on low tide, I missed a takeoff and got dragged over a jungle of reef. The blokes at the guest house, Aussies mostly, made a fuss and painted me up with mercure chrome. They complimented Dad on having such a gutsy daughter, and I think he was secretly proud. With nightfall came violent rumbles. The surf was doubling, trebling. I was glad I wouldn't be able to go out the next day. The men's voices, scarred and rough, were almost crushed by the sound of the water. They were talking about Nias. One of the older blokes had been to Nias back in the 60s. He went with another bloke and a French girl. After they'd been there a few days, an old man approached and told them to leave. Does someone own this land? We're happy to pay. Sayang got my uang. I don't want your money. I want you to leave. There was a splinter-sharp madness, a beetle-tinged absence. He shuffled off. In the surf, they learnt he was the town's Dukan. They'd heard about Dukans. They weren't scared. But that night, they discussed if there'd be any repercussions if they stayed. Nah, fuck it. We'll be right. The next day, the two men scored Lagundries, a flawless almond-eye barrel. They surfed until they were ravenous, until their skin glowed with the wattage of Jakartan brothels. When they got in, the French girl was out, off somewhere, probably walking. That evening, she still hadn't come back. All her stuff was there. Her passport, her money, her clothes, but no girl. They never found her. I finished the first draft of Tropo when I was living in Jawa Barat. My partner and I rented a double-storey house a street back from the sea, and in the afternoons, the light through the palm trees over my writing desk was the colour of, was sort of like watered-down mangoes and crushed cloves. At night, we listened, as Antonio Lobo Antunes might write, to the anguished howls of dogs. Living in Java provided me with the textures, tastes, sounds and smells which all form the weft of my book. It also provided me with the opportunity to meet people very much like the villain of my book, Shane. People who disregard the late-night cautionary tales from locals and other foreigners. People who belligerently hang on to the worst parts of their own culture. I feel confident that many people here tonight have also met Bules like Shane. Bule who moved to Indonesia and at first loved the place, the orang, the makanan, the uncrowded surf. But as the years pass, they start to tend a careful and patient hatred toward this country they once loved. They reckon the women are unfaithful, reckon everyone's out to rip them off. T.S. Eliot has a line, between the idea and the reality falls the shadow. In Tropo, all my characters are dancing with shadows. They're trapped somewhere between their dream of Indonesia and the reality of Indonesia. Tropo is a tale of what happens when you lose that love for the surf, when you lose that feeling for the magic, the danger and the politics of this country, of what happens to Bule who should leave, but who feel they have nowhere else to go.